Good morning. I'm Christopher Key. I'm coming here today to tell you a story about Royal Raymond Rife and me killing my grandmother. I want to start off by saying I'm not a medical doctor. I do not practice medicine without a license. Anything I tell you today is my opinion, which I believe is backed up with scientific research. So please don't believe anything I tell you. Take it all with a grain of salt, and then you have to go do your own research. This story started March 22nd, 2006. That was the day that my grandmother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Cancer had never been in my life. I never knew anybody that had cancer. I'm the most educated in my family, so the family came to me and asked me, what do we do? And I had no clue. I had no idea because, again, cancer had never been in my life. But I had some very good friends who were medical doctors. They were clients of mine, and they worked out of my health club. So I went to three of them. Two of them were pathologists, two very well-renowned pathologists in the country. The other one was a very well-renowned orthopedic surgeon. I went to all three of them and I said, look, my grandmother has pancreatic cancer. What would you do if it was your grandma? And all three of them said UAB in Birmingham. If anybody's going to save her life, UAB in Birmingham will. So I was like, okay. So I went to my grandmother and said, Grandma, I've done some research, and I want you to know that I think the best thing for you to do is to go to UAB here in Birmingham. I've talked to some very good friends of mine, and they say that these people can help you, and they have some of the best doctors in the country. You have to understand, my grandmother cannot stand medical doctors. She pretty much had only been to the doctor the 5 times she'd given birth to her 5 children, so she couldn't stand medical doctors. She really didn't like them. But me being the eldest grandson, and me pretty much, everybody said, was the love of her life, the apple, the one that she cared the most about. She looked at me and said, Christopher, because of you, and only because of you, I'll do this. Because I know you wouldn't steer me wrong. So she did, and in 35 days, my grandmother was dead. And this was very, very overwhelming for me because I'm the one that told her to go do this, and 35 days later she was dead. And it made no logical sense to me. I could not believe that this was the best that medical science had to offer, and my grandmother was dead in 35 days. So I was able to get her medical records and look and see what they had done to her as far as treatment goes, and come to find out they'd given her chemotherapy and radiation. I had no idea about chemotherapy and radiation, so I knew the only thing to do was to research chemotherapy and radiation. So I went to my local library and got every single book I could get on chemotherapy and radiation. I Googled it and did a lot of research on the internet on chemotherapy and radiation. And when I finished reading those books and doing that research, I'm like, how in the world could medical doctors do this to anybody? Because basically, chemotherapy and radiation kills every cell in the human body. And one of two things happen. You live or the cancer lives. And I could not believe this, that this was the only treatment there was for cancer. So it didn't sit well with me because I was, again, the one responsible for having my grandmother do this, and she was dead. So I began to do a lot of research on alternative therapies because I just felt in my heart that there had to be something else out there. And doing a lot of research, I came across a lot of different modalities and a lot of different therapies, and they just seemed very outlandish and sounded like snake oil and whatnot. In the process of this, I was doing a lot of research with frequencies for my new business, And I happened to be in Washington, D.C., and I said, what better place to do research in D.C. than the Library of Congress? I was in D.C. because I was working with some of the Washington Redskins football players, so I decided to go to the Library of Congress. And while I was in the Library of Congress, through the grace of God, I came across a book called Politics and Healing by Daniel Haley. And I just read this book and read it from cover to cover, and I could not believe what I was reading. And one of the things that really stood out to me in this book, Politics and Healing, was a guy named Raymond Rife, because he was doing a lot of work with frequencies. What I was doing at the time was a lot of things with frequencies, and he really resonated with me. So one of the things it talked about with him was the universal microscope, a microscope that he created, and at the time it was the most powerful microscope on planet Earth. The only microscope more powerful than it is the atomic microscope. But what people don't realize with the atomic microscope, when it magnifies something, it kills it, and you look at it while it's dead. The universal microscope that Raymond Rife created, you could look at the cells, cancer cells in particular, and look at them while they were still living. And why this was so important is he could look at a cancer cell under the microscope, and then he could take his frequency generator and his plasma tube and tune it to the frequency that would basically hit the cancer cell and basically destroy it, and it'd be dead. And I was like, wow, this makes logical sense. And continue to do research on Rife, and come to find out that in 1934, under University of Southern California, they put together a clinical study where he was giving 16 terminal cancer patients, and in 30 days he cured 14 of the 16. Took him another 30 days to cure the other 2, 100% cure rate. I was like, wow, I mean, this just makes no sense. How can this be real? How can this be real that this happened in 1934 and I've never heard about it, never read about it? So I left the Library of Congress that night. Just made no logical sense. Next day I got up, decided to go back to the Library of Congress, and while I was there, I came across a small book, and it was a list of all the Nobel Prize winners. And one of the Nobel Prize winners in there was a Dr. Warburg, and he was given the Nobel Prize in 1931, and his Nobel Prize for what was for no virus or bacteria live in an alkali state. And that made such logical sense to me, because I was a lifeguard, and I knew that if we kept our swimming pool slightly alkalized, it would be perfectly crystal clear blue. But if it got acidic, you would have algae and fungus, and it would turn green and just smell bad and be nasty. And that made such logical sense, because my background is in kinesiology and exercise physiology, and I understand the human body is pretty much 70% water. So this made so much logical sense that if you alkalize the human body, no virus or bacteria could live inside you, and you would stay perfectly healthy. I'm like, wow, how is this true and nobody's talking about this? It made no logical sense to me. So I leave DC, come back home, continue to do research, and I come across a man named Len Kinney, again through the grace of God, and this is a whole nother long story, but I won't get into all that now. But Len Kinney had bought part of the original estate of Raymond Rife, and he was able to back engineer it, and he had been helping people for almost 30 plus years with this device he had created for animal use only, and was doing some amazing things. And he befriended me. I mean, not befriended me. He and I became very good friends. He became a mentor of mine, and every extra hour I had, I would go to his house and I would just listen to him talk to people over the phones, and he was just talking about these amazing things that were happening with these people in their lives and whatnot. And I mean, I would just sit there and listen, and I would have to get him to put him on speakerphone, because I'm a very skeptical person, and I didn't know if he was just, talking on the phone and there really nobody there. So I wanted to hear these people and hear what they were really truly saying. And I couldn't believe it, because some amazing things were happening to these people. And I was very, very skeptical still. I still didn't believe all these things I'd read about and I'd researched and whatnot. And Lynn was going to a cancer convention in Los Angeles, California. He said, look, why don't you come out here to Los Angeles, since you're still a non-believer and you don't think any of this stuff is real, and just listen to the speakers, talk to the people out here and see what you think. He said, you can kind of introduce your new company and let them see what you're doing with frequencies and whatnot. It's like, it's a win-win. So I went out to California, very skeptical. Got out there, and they had some great presenters. But these presenters were chiropractors. They were naturopaths. They were naturopath, chiropractors, and other, not medical doctors, but many authors of books and whatnot. And all these people had an agenda to sell a modality or sell a book or get people to come to their clinic. And these guys gave unbelievable speeches and whatnot. But I knew that they were motivated by money, and I really couldn't believe what they were saying. So I still non-believer, but then I went back to Lynn's. He had a booth there, and I basically just sat there at the booth, and all these people would come up and they would be talking, and I'd be listening, and then afterwards I would talk to them myself, and these people were telling me how they had cancer and they'd used this modality and their cancer went away, and they had used this therapy and their cancer had went away, and they kept going on, and these people had no reason to be telling me these things. They weren't trying to sell me a device. They weren't trying to sell me a therapy. They were just having casual conversation about these different devices that had saved their life. And I was like, wow. One of the ones they had told me about was the Gerson therapy, and another one was the Hoxsey therapy, and another one was the Brzezinski therapy. So I left the conference thinking, this is possible. How probable it is, I don't know, because again, I'm a very skeptical person, and I understand the scientific method. I understand that things have got to be testable, provable, repeatable, and observable. And I wanted to see real research from this and real data. I'd heard a lot of testimonials and whatnot. So I got home back to Birmingham and started looking at more research, and I looked up the Gerson therapy and pulled hundreds and hundreds of patients and their medical records of what they had done at the Gerson therapy. Came across a lot of stuff with Hoxsey. And when I got to the one about Dr. Brzezinski, that was the one that pretty much put me over the edge, because when you do the research on Dr. Brzezinski and you realize what he's been doing for so many years in Texas, and how the government has done everything they could possibly do to shut this man down, and how thousands of people went to Congress to support him and to tell their story, you finally realize that this is very, very probable that this is going on. And I couldn't believe it. So I went back to Lynn and I said, look, Lynn, this makes no logical sense, but all the research is there, all the data is there. I can't believe this is real. I still can't believe this is real. And he said, why? I said, because I don't see how you could keep this covered up for so long and nobody know about it. How can this be? And why would they be doing this? And Lynn said, Christopher, it's one thing, and it's one thing only. It's all about the money. And I said, what do you mean it's about the money? How's it about the money? He said, well, do you know what the last disease we cured was? And I said, no, I have no clue. He said, well, it was polio. And he said, Christopher, do you realize that polio was a multi-million-dollar business? But when we cured polio, there were polio clinics on every corner. There were all these different polio treatments for people, all these different polio modalities. But when we cured polio, all those things went away. And economics in America took a very strong downward turn. And he says, isn't it quite ironic that we've never cured another disease since? And when he said that, my wheels were turning. I'm like, wow, this is very, very possible. It makes so much logical sense. But I could not believe that this is the world that we lived in, but it began to become truth, and I challenge you guys out there to please do your own research. Don't go to bed every night like I do, knowing that I was responsible for the death of my grandmother, because she did the chemotherapy and radiation because I told her to do it. And I know in my heart now that my grandmother would still be here today because of what I know. And I know my grandmother, unlike the rest of my family members, would listen to me, and she would do what I told her to do, and she would be alive. Because there are numerous of ways, I believe, to cure any and all disease. And I challenge you guys to do your own research and to please prove me wrong that these things are not true. I would love to see that proof. And I hope that my grandmother doesn't die in vain, and I hope that one of you people out there listening to this will do that research and realize that medical doctor is not God, and he only knows what he's been taught. And sadly, he's been taught drugs, chemicals, and surgery. He has no clue about the human body. He has no clue the human body is electrical. He has no clue about nutrition. And this is very, very sad. And I just hope you would do the research, and you'll become to realize that my truth is your truth. And when you realize that, I just hope and pray that you would share this with one other person. And when you share with one other person, 1 turns to 2, 2 turns to 4, 4 turns to 8, and before you know it, there's 7 billion souls that know this truth. And this truth will make you free. Thank you.